The grand dining hall of the Crystal Palace sparkled under the light of 3 moons. James Chen sat quietly at the long table, trying to ignore the whispers and giggles from the 3 Xantaxian princesses across from him. Princess Vexera, the eldest, raised her crystalline hand to cover her mouth as she spoke loudly to her sisters. "Look how pink his skin is, so soft and fragile. I bet he would shatter if he fell." James kept eating his meal, cutting the strange alien meat into small pieces. He was the only human at the table, surrounded by the tall, crystal-skinned Xantaxians. Their bodies sparkled like diamonds, making his plain Earth diplomat uniform look dull in comparison. Princess Lyris, the middle sister, pointed at his hands. "How does he even hold anything with those stubby fingers? No wonder humans are so far behind in technology." Her silver eyes flashed with amusement as the other nobles joined in the laughter. The youngest, Princess Mytel, made a show of moving away from James. "I heard humans leak water when they're hot. How disgusting. Keep him away from me. I don't want to get wet." More laughter echoed through the hall. James remembered his training. Stay calm. Don't show anger. Earth needed this alliance. He took another bite of food, pretending not to understand their language. King Zaxthor sat at the head of the table, watching everything. His crystal skin had a slight gray color, different from the healthy shine of the others. His eyes moved between his laughing daughters and the quiet human. "Ambassador Chen," the king's deep voice cut through the noise. "How do you find our hospitality?" The princesses went quiet, waiting to hear the human embarrass himself. James wiped his mouth carefully and spoke in perfect Xantaxian. "Your Majesty honors me with this feast. The food is as excellent as the company is enlightening." The king's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. The princesses stopped laughing, surprised by his perfect pronunciation and diplomatic response. "Indeed," said King Zaxthor, touching his chest, where the gray color seemed to be spreading. "Sometimes the most enlightening moments come when we least expect them." The princesses went back to their meals, but now their laughter seemed forced. James noticed the king watching him with those ancient, knowing eyes. Something in that look made him wonder if this dinner was more than just another diplomatic meeting. As the night went on, none of them knew this was the last time the king would dine in his great hall. None of them guessed how their laughter would soon turn to shock when they learned the king's final command. 3 days after the feast, the Crystal Palace fell silent. King Zaxthor lay in his chamber, the gray plague spreading across his once brilliant skin. The 3 princesses stood by his bed, their usual laughter replaced by quiet tears. "My daughters," the king's voice came out weak. "I have watched you grow with pride, but also concern. Your beauty is matched only by your arrogance." Princess Vexera stepped forward. "Father, save your strength," the healers say. "The healers cannot help me." The king coughed, gray cracks spreading further. "Before I go, I must ensure the future of our people. Call Ambassador Chen." The princesses exchanged worried looks, but soon James entered the chamber. He bowed deeply to the dying king. "Ambassador," King Zaxthor said, "you have shown wisdom beyond your years. Despite mockery, you maintained dignity. Despite insults, you showed respect." The king raised his hand, activating the ancient crystal recorder that would make his words unchangeable law. "My final decree. My 3 daughters shall be bound in marriage to Ambassador James Chen of Earth." "What het?" All 3 princesses shouted at once. Mytel fell to her knees. "Father, you cannot be serious." "The law is clear," the king continued, his voice growing weaker. "A monarch's death decree cannot be challenged. The unions must happen within 1 lunar cycle." Lyris grabbed her father's hand. "This is madness. He's human. Our people will never accept this." "They will accept what I command." The king's eyes turned to James, who stood shocked but silent. "Ambassador, do you accept this responsibility?" James looked at the horrified princesses, then back to the king. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "If it is your will, your Majesty, I accept." "No," Vexera shouted. "We refuse. We would rather." "Rather what?" The king's voice suddenly boomed through the chamber. "Rather shame our family by breaking ancient law. Rather start a civil war. Your pride has blinded you. Perhaps," he coughed again, "perhaps seeing life through human eyes will teach you what you need to learn." The gray plague reached the king's face. With his last breath, he whispered, "The decree is made. May you all find wisdom in what comes next." King Zaxthor's body crystallized completely, becoming a perfect statue of gray stone. The princesses stood frozen in shock, their world turned upside down by their father's final command. James bowed to his future wives, speaking softly. "I'll give you time to mourn." He left the chamber, knowing the hardest part was yet to come. A week after the king's death, assassins struck in the night. They thought the human would be an easy target. Soft skin, no crystal armor. They were wrong. James Chen's primitive reflexes saved his life. Whereas Antaxian would move with careful grace, he rolled across the floor, dodging crystal spears. The assassins hadn't expected such quick, unpredictable movements. Princess Vexera found him in the morning, cleaning a cut on his arm. "You survived," she said, surprise in her silver eyes. "Humans are harder to kill than you think." James pressed a bandage to his wound. "Your people rely too much on crystal technology. Sometimes simple solutions work better." That same day, the royal council gathered to challenge the marriage decree. Old nobles spoke for hours about tradition and purity. James sat quietly, listening. The princesses expected him to stay silent, to show his inferiority. Instead, he stood and addressed the council in formal Xantaxian, citing ancient laws and precedents. He spoke of how Earth-Xantaxian cooperation could benefit both worlds. His words weren't perfect, but his confidence was unshakable. "He's smarter than he looks," Lyris whispered to her sisters. More attacks came, poison in his food, but human biology processed it differently. The sabotage transport, but his quick thinking prevented a crash. Each time, the princesses watched him survive and adapt. During a court dinner, Vexera noticed something strange. While Xantaxian nobles moved stiffly in their ceremonial crystal armor, James moved freely in his simple uniform. When a servant stumbled, the nobles stayed still, but James caught the falling tray. "How did you react so fast?" she asked him later. "Humans don't have your natural armor," James explained. "We learn to be quick instead. Each species adapts differently to survive." The assassins tried one last time. They trapped James in a room with rising crystal spikes. A Xantaxian would have been impaled trying to climb the smooth walls. But James used his soft human hands to grip tiny cracks, his flexible body twisting through spaces a crystal being couldn't. Princess Mytel watched through the security feed as he escaped. "He's not primitive," she realized. "He's just different." That night, Vexera found James in the palace garden, looking at the stars. For the first time, she saw him clearly, not as an inferior being, but as someone who had mastered different kinds of strength. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "our father was wiser than we knew." James smiled, but said nothing. The revelation was beginning. Sometimes the best response to prejudice wasn't words, but simply surviving, adapting, and proving them wrong. Red alert sirens woke everyone in the Crystal Palace. The Drachnid Empire, ancient enemies of the Xantaxians, had launched a surprise attack. Their black ships filled the night sky, targeting the kingdom's crystal defense systems. Their weapons are tuned to shatter crystal. Princess Lyris shouted in the war room, "Our shields are useless." The nobles expected James Chen to hide or run. Instead, he was already at the command console, linking with Earth's military satellites. "Your weakness doesn't have to be our weakness," he said, fingers flying over the controls. "What can humans do against Drachnid weapons?" A general sneered. His answer came as Earth ships appeared through jump points, surrounding the Drachnid fleet. "Humans don't rely on crystal tech," James explained, Coordinating with Earth commanders, we learned to fight differently. The Earth ship's metal hulls ignored the crystal-shattering beams, their conventional weapons striking drachnid weak points. Princess Mytel watched in amazement as James directed the battle. He didn't move with Zentaxian precision. He adapted, changed plans, took risks no crystal mind would consider. Emotional instability they had once mocked. Now they saw how human unpredictability could be a strength. They're breaking through Sector 7. Vexera pointed at the tactical display. Before anyone could react, James was already redirecting forces, using Earth ships to cover Zentaxian evacuation vessels. "You're protecting our civilians before the palace?" Lyris asked, surprised. "A leader's duty is to their people first," James replied, not looking up from his work. The princesses shared a look, remembering their father's words about wisdom. The battle raged for hours. James stayed at his post, refusing breaks. His primitive endurance kept him going when even crystal bodies needed rest. When a drachnid missile breached the palace shields, he pushed Lyris out of the way, taking a crystal shard in his shoulder. "Why?" she asked as medics treated him. "Why risk yourself for us after how we treated you?" James winced as they removed the shard. "Because that's what humans do. We protect our family, even when they don't like us much." His words hit harder than any drachnid weapon. The princesses watched him return to the command console, injured but unbowed. They had laughed at human loyalty, called it a weakness. Now they saw it was a power their crystal hearts were just beginning to understand. The Gray Plague struck without warning. Princess Mytel collapsed during breakfast, her crystal skin showing the same dull patches that had killed their father. Her sisters rushed her to the medical chamber, but the healers stood helpless. "The plague is evolving," the head healer explained. "Our traditional cures no longer work. The only hope is the radiation chamber, but the levels needed would shatter any Zentaxian who enters." James studied the medical readings. "What about a human? Are you insane?" Vexera grabbed his arm. "The radiation would kill you too." "Maybe not." James pointed to the data. "Human cells can repair radiation damage better than crystal structures. We evolved dealing with solar radiation on Earth." "But if you're wrong," Lyris started, "then you'll need to find new husbands." James smiled weakly. "Lucky for you, that probably won't be hard." Before they could stop him, he entered the chamber. The radiation turned the air purple. Through the viewport, they watched him collect samples from the intensive treatment machines, his skin reddening but his movements steady. "His cells are changing," the healer said, watching the readings. "The radiation is causing rapid mutation, but instead of dying, humans adapt," Vexera whispered, remembering James's words from weeks ago. When James finally stumbled out, his blood tests revealed something extraordinary. The radiation had triggered his body to produce new antibodies, ones that could fight the crystal plague. "Human blood is chaotic," the healer explained, synthesizing a cure from James's samples. "It changes constantly. The very thing we thought made humans weak might save us all." Mytel recovered within days. She found James in the garden, still pale from radiation exposure. "You risked dying painfully to save me," she said, "after how cruel I was about human weakness." "Humans learned something important early in our history," James replied. "True strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about being willing to break yourself to protect others." The three princesses gathered around him, their crystal hands gentle on his radiation-burned skin. They had laughed at human simplicity, at human weakness, at human imperfection. Now they understood. Adaptability was its own kind of perfection. Breaking and healing could be stronger than never breaking at all. Their perfect crystal bodies suddenly seemed rigid, unchanging, while his soft human form held secrets of survival they were only beginning to grasp. The Drachnid Empire returned with their full fleet. 10,000 ships darkened the skies of Zentaxia, their crystal-shattering weapons powered up for a final assault. "They think we're still vulnerable," James said in the war room. "They don't know what we've built." Over the past weeks, he had worked with Zentaxian engineers, combining human and crystal technology in ways neither species had tried before. Metal-crystal hybrid shields surrounded the planet. Weapon systems merged Earth's raw power with Zentaxian precision. "The defense grid is ready," Princess Vexera announced. She had learned to work the human-designed controls, her crystal fingers adapting to their strange feel. But will it hold? The answer came as the first Drachnid wave attacked. Their crystal breaker beams hit the hybrid shields and scattered, confused by the mixed materials. Earth weapons blazed through the gaps, while Zentaxian crystal cannons provided perfect targeting. "We need more power to the southern grid," Lyris shouted as enemy ships concentrated their fire. James ran to the maintenance tunnels, the princesses following close behind. "The crystal reactors are failing," Maytel reported. "They can't handle the energy load." "Then we'll handle it differently." James connected human power cells to the crystal matrix, a combination that should have been impossible. "Your perfection, our adaptability." Together, the princesses joined him, their crystal hands linking with his human ones on the controls. Where crystal would shatter, metal bent. Where metal would melt, crystal stayed cool. The impossible hybrid held. Above, the Drachnid fleet found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't understand. Their tactics, designed to exploit either human or Zentaxian weaknesses, failed against this merged defense. They're retreating. The war room erupted in cheers as the black ships fled. The princesses hugged James, their crystal forms clicking against his soft body, but neither caring any more about the difference. "You've proven something today," an old general admitted grudgingly. "Perhaps strength comes in more forms than we knew." James looked at the princesses, seeing respect where mockery had once lived. "The strongest metals," he said, "are always alloys." The victory celebration lasted all night. But the real victory wasn't just over the Drachnids. It was over prejudice, over pride, over the assumption that different meant weaker. The laughter in the crystal halls now was shared, not cruel, as two species learned they were stronger together than apart. The crystal palace shimmered with lights from both Earth and Zentaxia. 3 wedding ceremonies would happen today, but not because of a king's command. The law had given them 1 lunar cycle to marry. They had taken 3, and no one objected. "I never thought I'd willingly marry a human," Princess Vexera said, adjusting her crystal silk dress. She watched James greeting Earth diplomats in the garden, teaching them proper Zentaxian bows. "Remember when we thought his pink skin was funny?" Maytel laughed, but kindly now. "Look how it glows in our moon's light. Different can be beautiful." The ceremonies mixed both worlds' traditions. James wore a human tuxedo covered in living crystal that adapted to his movements. The princesses wore dresses that combined crystal elegance with soft earth fabrics. "The old nobles still whisper," Lyris observed, watching the crowd. "But now they whisper about how our kingdom grows stronger each day." It was true. Trade between Earth and Zentaxia had exploded. Hybrid technologies were revolutionizing both worlds. The Drachnid Empire had signed a peace treaty, scared of facing both species united. When James took his vows, he spoke in perfect Zentaxian. When the princesses responded, they used Earth English they had studied in secret. Their words echoed through the crystal halls where cruel laughter had once lived. "I choose you," each princess said, making it clear this was their will, not their father's. James's eyes shone with tears, something that once would have disgusted them, but now seemed beautiful in its humanity. The celebrations lasted 3 days. Humans danced with Zentaxians, their different movements creating new kinds of grace. Crystal wine flowed in metal cups. Earth music played from crystal instruments. In a quiet moment, Maytel found her father's crystal statue in the royal vault. "You knew," she whispered. "You saw what we couldn't." "He saw potential," James said, joining her. "In all of us." The 3 princesses and their human husband ruled with both strength and flexibility. Their children grew up with pink crystal skin that could adapt and change, combining the best of both worlds. Years later, when visitors asked about the strange laughter sometimes heard in the palace halls, the princesses would smile. That long-ago mockery had become their favorite story, a reminder that love and wisdom could grow in the most unexpected places, between the most different hearts.